So we are on to science, life in Surtsey. So if you have the book, go ahead and get it out. Also, pause the video and narrate to someone some of the steps that the researchers took when they first landed on Surtsey Island. Some of the things they brought with them, and how they begin to track and grid certain areas in order to make observations concerning life growth on the island of Surtsey. So pause and do that and then come back. Okay, so we are going to pick up back on page 24, and we're going to talk about pitfalls. So that's a picture of the pitfall right there. And I talked a little bit in the email last week, maybe in the video, about how you can make one in your yard. So that would be interesting, and I'm going to make one in my yard and see what happens. I remember one year we did something similar and found dung beetles rolling dung, because we had a small pile of dung we were going to use in a garden. Fascinating. It was very fascinating to me. So, but let's begin on page 25 where it says pitfall traps. So if you have the book, you can follow along. Pitfall traps are used to capture terrestrial insects, those that crawl on land rather than flying over it. The traps are surprisingly simple devices. After photographing an individual square, Erling pulls from his backpack a small plastic cup, a soda bottle of clear liquid, a large plastic lid, a large metal staple, and a spoon. He walks to the approximate center of the square, kneels down, and uses the spoon to dig in the black sand. When he's cleared a hole of the right size, he pushes the plastic cup into it, taking care to set its edges completely level with the surface of the sand. Then he pours a bit of the clear liquid, a preservative called formaldehyde, into the trap. A crawling insect walking on the sand is unlikely to notice the cup. When it steps over the edge, it will fall into the formaldehyde, which will both drown and preserve it. Erling and Matthias will come back at the end of the week to collect the insects trapped in each cup. Later, back in Erling's lab on the mainland, they'll identify each and every insect found in each and every cup. People sometimes ask Erling if it's necessary to kill the insects in order to study them. This question always surprises him. "I never think of it that way," he says. Sampling insects that have made their way to Surtsey gives Erling a crucial glimpse into the process by which an ecosystem, a community of living organisms, forms. And by collecting insects year after year, he can watch these newly formed ecosystems evolve. The simple truth is that those samples cannot be collected, identified, and released in a single week. There are simply too many insects to look at. And so Erling traps them and takes them back to the mainland with him. It can take years to properly identify every insect he collects in the course of a single week. When a tray cup is placed and filled, Erling makes a canopy with the plastic lid and the metal staple. The canopy sits high enough that it won't interfere with insects walking into the trap, but low enough to keep out the rain. Trap set, canopy in place, Erling walks out of the square, carefully reusing the footprints he made on the way in. At the edge of the square, he takes a second photo. Then he shoulders his pack, grabs his net, and hikes to the next square. Erling and Matthias work this way for hours, and the setting of the first 15 pitfall traps brings them around the entire southern half of the island on foot. The early squares are in the sandy terrain of Surtsey's middle, but eventually the two make their way towards the island's southern edge. As they do, the terrain changes. The density of plant material increases gradually, and with every step, the scenery looks less volcanic. This is a sign that they're nearing the gull colony. So hopefully you looked up those two seagulls that were talked about a couple of weeks ago, the first two that started coming to the island, because these are going to be important in the next couple of pages. If you didn't look at those, after this ends, you can go back and look at the video I sent a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, I sent links to pictures and the sounds that the birds make, so you'll be a little bit more familiar. So I want you to pause just a minute and draw a picture, and then write one sentence on your picture of like a little block. We've done this before, where you just draw kind of a square, fold your paper in half, and on the first square, draw a picture of what we just read, what was going on with Mr. Erling, and what he was doing to capture the insects. And then turn the video back on and we'll continue. The colony is just as it looked from the air, green and lush. It's filled with the sights and sounds of hundreds of seagulls, swooping, squawking birds in flight, standing, squawking birds on the ground, and feathers, fish bones, eggshells, old nests, new nests, eggs, nestlings, debris of all sorts. The gull colony is alive with birds and plants too. Fescue, a type of grass, covers the ground in thick clumps that completely hide all traces of the lava sand it grows in. 2 steps into the drenched plants covering the gull colony, and both scientists are soaked to their knees. They trudge on anyway, locate the next square, and set the next trap. The important role of seagulls in the evolution of life on Surtsey has been recorded and analyzed for decades by scientists. Early on, before the gulls began breeding here, this area was covered with the same lava formations and thick black sand that covers the rest of the island. The first plants to root here were the same ones that rooted elsewhere on Surtsey's sandy lava, pioneer species that were able to grow into extreme conditions. Unlike the rest of the island, however, the lava fields were also well situated for species of birds who survive on food from the sea. In 1974, 4 years after Erling first recorded breeding guillemots and fulmars on the island, a pair of greater black-backed gulls built a nest in a mound of sandwort plant that was growing on a sand-covered lava flat. By 1978, there were 6 nests. In 2002, there were 35, and today at least 100 pairs nest in the area. The arrival of the birds changed everything on this part of the island. So I'm going to show you a picture of them setting the pitfalls. Can you see that? And then over here is a picture of them going through that grass, the fescue, and now you can see why they were wet all the way up to their knees. Some of the changes were easy to see. The nests themselves, excrement covering the lava and sand around the nests, food scraps littering the area. Harder to see at first were the changes these additions made in the lava sand itself. Basically, the gulls were adding nutrients to the sand. Decomposing nest materials, excrement, and food scraps made the sand in the lava field much richer than sand in other parts of the island. And richer sand is easier for plants to grow in. So I want you to pause the video again, take the next square on a piece of paper, and draw a little picture, and then write some of the changes that went on over the last few years concerning the seagulls. Then start the video again and we'll begin. Okay, let's begin again. I'm on page 28 now if you have your own book. As the gulls enriched the sand, they were also seeding it with new life. The wisps of plant material they carried in to build nests often included rooted plants. It's possible some of these wisps took hold. More likely, the birds carried in seeds, hidden in nesting material or in the crevices of their feet and feathers or in their excrement. Because of this, seeds arrived in the lava field much more frequently than anywhere else on the island. They were dropped into soil that was richer than anywhere else too. The seeds sprouted, and the gull colony became the center of plant life on the island. The plants that thrived in the early years of the gull colony's existence soon gave way to newer species, including grasses such as fescue. These new grasses also thrived in the rich sand, eventually covering the entire area of the colony. As the changes to the plant colony in the plant cover in the gull colony progressed, new insect habitats were created. And when insects made it to the island, flying in on their own power, blown in on strong winds, or carried in by birds, some of them thrived in these new habitats. Prior to the arrival of the gulls, Ehrling and his colleagues recorded 171 species of land invertebrates, insects, and spiders on the island. Remember, an invertebrate is an animal that does not have a backbone. A decade later, there were 354. As Ehrling wrote in one of his research reports, most invertebrate species were found in the gull colony, and when compared with the sandy surfaces, the species composition is much more diverse. This larger insect population, in turn, has made Surtsey a more suitable place for other birds to nest. Snow buntings, for example, do not eat seafood as gulls do. They eat seeds and feed their young with insects. Early on, it was impossible for snow buntings to survive on Surtsey, for there were too few seeds and insects for them to utilize. Now that the gull colony is teeming with plant and insect life, however, snow buntings can survive here. They were first found nesting on Surtsey in 1996. Several other insectivore bird species are known to nest here now too, including meadow pipits and white wagtails. So first, here's a view that's going out to sea. And it says, this view out to sea contains more sand, rock, more plants, and distant islands made of the same material. So you can see, if you can see there, the distant islands off in the back part, and then the materials there. So the gulls changed the soil, which increased its suitability for plants, which thrived and provided habitat for new and larger insect populations, which further enriched the soil. More plants moved in, more insects moved in, and eventually more bird species moved in too. This process of change is called succession, and it has been monitored more closely on Surtsey than perhaps anywhere else in the world. Okay, so pause the video and take your third square and do a picture with a narration, one sentence, of what this succession looks like, where birds, it goes from birds to all the other things that are in between, which I want you to try to remember some of them, and ending up with more birds. And then come back and we'll finish our section. Okay, so trying to see where we're going to finish this today. Okay. One of the first 15 pitfall traps are set. Once they are set, Ehrling and Mathias return to the research hut. The other scientists are all starting their own work, so the place is empty. The two have something to eat and something warm to drink, and they replenish their trap supplies. Then they head back out, this time to set pitfall traps on the north side of the island. It's late in the day now, and it's raining. But since the July sun doesn't set until 11 p.m. in Iceland, they've got plenty of time. As they work, the scientists pass a surprising number of weather-beaten wooden stakes. The stakes tilt one way or the other, haphazardly marking nothing, or so it seems. In truth, the placement of these stakes is far from random. 120 of them, of course, mark the corners of the 30 10-meter by 10-meter squares that Ehrling and Mathias have been setting pitfall traps in today. But dozens more mark places where new-to-the-island plants were recorded for the first time. On these stakes are notations in permanent marker recording the plant in question and the date of its discovery. In a way that only someone intimately familiar with Surtsey and its history could, Ehrling knows the purpose and history of almost every stake he passes. Every time he passes a stake marking a once new arrival, he stops to assess the situation. Botanists will take an official record of this stake and plant its marks later in the week. But Ehrling can't help but see for himself if the new plant has survived an Icelandic winter. Sometimes they have, and sometimes they haven't. Eventually, Ehrling and Mathias set the last pitfall trap. There are advantages, however, to being the last team to return to the hut. The portable heater is running and the cabin is now warm and cozy. Bjorg has made porridge and the table is set for eating. Borgpor has made porridge. As each scientist spoons out a bowl, jazzes it up with raisins and cinnamon and milk, the stories start. Everyone shares what they've seen, what is new, and what has stayed the same so far on Surtsey. After dinner, dishes are washed in rainwater that was collected from the roof and boiled just for the purpose. Leftovers are carried out to the refrigerator in the sand hole behind the hut. The tables fill up again, but this time with notebooks for recording the day's observations and equipment being organized for the next day's work. Someone switches on a portable generator so that everyone can charge his or her computer and cell phone. The scientists rest, read, and talk. By 10 o'clock, it's still light outside, but everyone has slipped into his or her sleeping bunk. At some point, the sun will set, and this day will end, but the entire Surtsey team will be asleep by then. So here's some pictures that I wanted to show you. What do you think those are? So those are some bones and an empty nest, and then an egg of one of the birds, and it says a gull. It doesn't tell me what kind of bird on there. But then they talked about the snow bunting. What a pretty bird. So I just wanted you to see this picture of the snow bunting. And then those are the baby buntings with their mouths open down there on the bottom. Cute little birdie. And then here's a picture of the bunk room. So when everybody went to sleep, there's where they slept. Okay, so I want you to now take the time to fill in the last picture of the last part of what we just read. So draw a picture, write one sentence, and make sure you put the date and that this is from science, and you can even put Life on Surtsey. There's how you spell it. So you know where this came from, what subject you were studying when you drew that picture. And that'll be all that we read for today in Life of Surtsey. Be sure, if you haven't been doing the experiment, to try to do the experiment or try this cup experiment, because I think each of us could easily find the material that we need at home to do this cup experiment. And be interesting to see what kind of insects that each of us collect. And remember, instead of formaldehyde, you can use alcohol, and that will drown and kill your insect too. Okay, hope you guys have fun outdoors.